Right now, at this exact moment, someone in Tokyo is finishing dinner. Someone in Lagos hasn't started theirs yet. And someone in Madrid won't even think about eating for another 4 hours. Same planet, same hunger. Completely different clocks, completely different plates. Dinner feels like the most universal ritual on Earth, and it might be the least universal thing about us. Every human being eats an evening meal. That much is constant. But almost everything else about it, when, what, how much, with whom, in what order, changes the moment you cross a border. Dinner isn't just food. It's a record of a country's climate, its history, its religion, its economy, even its relationship with time itself. Look closely enough at what 195 countries eat for dinner, and you're not looking at recipes. You're looking at 195 different answers to the same question. How should a day end? Start with time, because time is where the differences begin. In Spain, dinner rarely happens before 9 or 10 at night, a habit historians trace back to a strange accident of the clock. In 1940, Spain shifted its official time zone forward to align with Nazi Germany rather than neighboring Portugal. But the sun never moved. Spaniards kept working, eating, and living by the old solar rhythm underneath a new clock that was an hour ahead of where it should be. 8 decades later, the mismatch is still baked into the culture. Lunch at 3, dinner at 10, and a nation that, on paper, is permanently jet-lagged against its own sun. Now, go north. In Norway and Sweden, dinner, middag, often lands between 4 and 6 in the evening, sometimes before the sun has even set in summer. Nordic work culture prizes an early end to the day, and family time in the evening matters more than a late, drawn-out meal. 2 European countries, a few hours apart by flight, and their dinner tables are separated by nearly 6 hours on the clock. Then there's what's actually on the plate. And here, the differences aren't just cultural preference, they're often shaped by necessity. In much of West Africa, dinner, in countries like Nigeria and Ghana, centers on a starchy staple, fufu, pounded yam, or jollof rice, built to be filling, affordable, and shareable across a household that might include extended family. In Ethiopia, dinner isn't plated at all in the way most of the world imagines a meal. Injera, a spongy sourdough flatbread, becomes the plate itself, torn by hand and used to scoop up stews called wats. There are no individual servings. Everyone eats from the same surface, sometimes literally feeding a bite to the person beside them, a gesture called gursha, an act of trust and closeness built directly into the act of eating. In Japan, dinner takes the opposite approach. Not one shared surface, but many small, separate ones. A traditional evening meal might include rice, miso soup, a piece of grilled fish, a small mound of pickled vegetables, and a simmered dish, each in its own dish, each eaten in careful rotation. The principle is called ichiju sansai, 1 soup, 3 sides, a structure so old it shaped how Japanese kitchens are still organized today. Balance isn't a health slogan there. It's baked into the architecture of the meal. Cross into Latin America and dinner shrinks. In much of Mexico and across parts of Central America, lunch, the comida, is the largest, most important meal of the day, often eaten mid-afternoon with family. Dinner, the cena, is frequently light, a simple quesadilla, sweet bread with coffee, or leftovers reheated in minutes. The heavy lifting already happened hours earlier. In Brazil and Argentina, dinner shifts the other way, later and often the main social event of the day, especially in Argentina, where the asado, a slow-grilled barbecue, can turn a Tuesday dinner into a 3-hour gathering. Religion reorganizes dinner entirely in some parts of the world. During Ramadan, dinner isn't just a meal in dozens of Muslim-majority countries. It's the end of a fast. Iftar, the meal that breaks the day's fasting at sunset, traditionally begins with dates and water, a practice tied to Islamic tradition, before moving into a full spread that can be the most elaborate meal of the entire month. In Jewish households observing Shabbat, Friday night dinner becomes a fixed ritual. Candles, wine, challah bread, and a meal that's less about the food itself and more about the pause it forces into the week. And in some of the world's coldest and most remote regions, dinner is shaped less by culture and more by pure survival math. In parts of the Arctic, among Inuit communities, traditional dinners historically centered on whatever the hunt provided: seal, caribou, fish. Because in an environment with almost no agriculture, dinner wasn't a choice of cuisine. It was the day's success or failure made edible. In India, dinner changes almost entirely depending on which region you're standing in. In the north, a typical evening meal might center on wheat, rotis or parathas paired with a vegetable curry or dal, while across the south, rice takes over as the base, often with sambar, a lentil and vegetable stew, or a coconut-based curry. Layer religion on top of geography, and it fractures further still. Large parts of the population eat no beef at all out of respect for Hindu tradition, while others avoid pork for Islamic reasons, meaning a country of over 1 billion people doesn't share one dinner. It shares a framework that gets rebuilt differently in almost every household. In China, dinner is rarely one dish at all. A home-cooked evening meal is typically built around rice or noodles, plus several shared dishes: a stir-fried vegetable, a protein, maybe a soup, placed in the center of the table for everyone to take from communally, with chopsticks doing the work a fork and knife would do elsewhere. The number of dishes often scales with the occasion. More guests simply means more bowls added to the center, not bigger individual portions. In France and Italy, dinner slows down on purpose. A French dinner traditionally unfolds in courses, perhaps a light starter, a main, cheese, then dessert, treated less as fuel and more as an evening event with its own pacing. Italy runs on a similar rhythm, but built around pasta or a regional specialty, eaten later than in Northern Europe, and, in many households, still treated as sacred enough that interruptions, a phone at the table, are considered close to rude. In Russia and much of Eastern Europe, dinner tends to lean hearty and warming, a direct response to long winters. Soups like borscht, potatoes, bread, and preserved vegetables that can be stored through a season with little fresh produce. In the Middle East, outside of Ramadan, a typical evening meal in countries like Lebanon or Jordan might unfold as a mezze spread: small shared plates of hummus, tabbouleh, and grilled meats, eaten slowly, often stretching a single dinner into a 2-hour social occasion rather than a quick refuel. Across Southeast Asia, in countries like Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia, dinner is frequently built around rice and several small shared dishes eaten family-style. But increasingly, it's not eaten at home at all. Night markets and street food stalls have become the default kitchen for millions of urban residents, where a full dinner can be bought, cooked, and eaten within minutes for less than the cost of buying the raw ingredients yourself. And in the United States and Australia, dinner has drifted toward something looser still, less a fixed ritual than a flexible slot in the evening, shaped by two-income households, long commutes, and a food industry built around convenience. Meal kit deliveries, drive-through lanes, and food delivery apps have quietly rewritten what cooking dinner even means for a large share of households, turning a meal that once required an hour of preparation into a decision made from a phone screen. Here's what actually breaks the assumption most people walk in with. We tend to imagine dinner as the real meal, the biggest, most important one, the one families build their day around. That's true in plenty of places, but it's not universal, and treating it like a global default hides something important. In a large number of countries, dinner isn't the main event at all. It's the smallest meal, the leftover meal, the meal squeezed in after the real eating already happened at lunch. Spain eats late because lunch runs long. Mexico eats light at dinner because lunch already did the work. Even the idea that dinner is a sit-down family meal isn't close to universal. In fast-urbanizing countries across Asia, a huge share of dinners are eaten standing at a street stall, alone at a desk, or picked up already cooked, because street food and takeaway culture has replaced home cooking as the default evening option for millions of people. The image of dinner as a nightly ceremony around a table turns out to be less a global truth and more a specific cultural export, one that doesn't match how most of the planet actually eats. This matters beyond curiosity, because dinner is quietly one of the clearest windows into how a country actually functions. A late Spanish dinner tells you about labor history and time zones. An early Nordic one tells you about work-life boundaries most other countries are still fighting for. Injera, shared from one plate in Ethiopia, tells you something about a culture that treats individual servings as almost impolite. Rice and miso in precise small bowls tells you Japan treats a meal the way it treats most things, with restraint and order. And the sheer number of countries where dinner is now a rushed, solo, or street-bought affair tells you something bigger still, that industrialization, urban migration, and long commutes are reshaping the evening meal everywhere, not just in wealthy countries. Anthropologists studying food and society, including researchers on shared meals and social bonding, have pointed to something that shows up again and again across very different cultures. That eating together, in whatever form a culture builds around it, tends to correlate with stronger social bonds, and its erosion tends to track alongside rising isolation. Dinner isn't just about what's on the plate. It might be one of the last daily rituals holding entire communities together, in whatever shape each culture has built it. 195 countries, 195 versions of the same question. How do you end the day? And almost no two answers that match. Different clocks, different plates, different reasons for eating what they eat, when they eat it. But underneath every version, from a torn piece of injera to a bowl of miso soup to a 10 o'clock Spanish table still full at midnight, the same instinct survives. At the end of a hard day, on every continent, in every language, people still find a way to sit down, or stand, or gather, or share, and eat one more time before the day is allowed to end.